Good morning and good afternoon. I want to welcome everybody to today's event on behalf of the German Marshall Fund. This event today is being co-hosted by our Washington office, but also our office in Warsaw and my colleague Veranika Laputska. Thank you so much for being the driving force behind this event. Of course, we're focused on the upcoming Belarus election. We, German Marshall Fund in the United States, has long been involved both in engaging with Belarusians, including in civil society, but also through policy in Eastern Europe. And of course, Belarus is front and center this week because of the upcoming election this weekend on Sunday. And we're really pleased to have really what I think is a really great panel, many of whom are deeply busy right now, either writing about the election, following it, engaging. And so we're really lucky to have who we have today, especially given the increasingly contentious nature of this election. And so I want to thank colleagues joining from RFE, RL, from Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, from iSANS, and also from the European College of Liberal Arts in Belarus. All experts in their own right, all following what's taking place tremendously closely. What I want to just make sure everybody knows is just a little bit of housekeeping is that this event is on the record. We'll have a video of it afterwards for those who want to refer back to it and who can't stay with us the whole time. In addition, during the event, the speakers can't see you. You can only see who's speaking. There's a Q&A function, Zoom function that we ask that you use throughout the event to pose questions to our speakers. And you can do that at any point in the event. So please use that Q&A function on the Zoom screen. So again, thank you just to all of our speakers for joining. One thing I wanted to sort of raise, obviously Belarus, the election, the events over the last several weeks, from Washington looking outward were quite unexpected. And I think when US Secretary of State Pompeo went to Minsk in the beginning of February, I think US policymakers, and I'm sure this was the same whether you're sitting in Warsaw or if you're sitting in Brussels or Berlin or Paris, didn't quite think that the current presidential election taking place this week would be contentious, or that the political grounds in Belarus would have been shaken in the way that they've been shaken. And so I think this is what makes this unique. Of course, there are some things that have happened that are catalysts for, that our speakers will go into as the catalyst of why this took place, why these changes are taking place. But of course, I think one that is quite important is the response of President Lukashenko, who's been in power since 1994, and as many in the West believe is, they call him the last dictator in Europe, but unfortunately, there's some others that are maybe giving him a run for his money and with that moniker. But I think many of the policy analysts, did not expect things would change. Then COVID-19 hits. And there is an absolutely sort of bizarre, but also irresponsible response by the president of Belarus to a global pandemic. And when you look at the economy in Belarus, when you look at even previous polling, where you saw that what people in Belarus want to have happen, which is including independence and sovereignty, economic opportunity, the concept of good governance in the middle of a pandemic, and a lack of it in Belarus, as we see in a number of other countries globally, is having a political impact everywhere. And Belarus is no different in terms of what populations want. COVID-19 is not the only issue on the table. And so I'm really looking forward to hearing from our speakers and experts who can talk about why these changes, why are you seeing 60,000 people on the streets at a rally for opposition candidate for president, who is a woman and sort of unprecedented in Belarus too. You're seeing really some dramatic breakthroughs. And I think even looking at it from Washington, who have seen Belarus and in the past have seen moments where you think that democracy and these issues are on the cusp of sort of a tipping point, there's a lot of question marks about whether there's sustainability between now and after the election and what this means for Belarus in the future. One thing that is fairly certain and clear is that without the OSCE, ODIHR, without the right type of election observers in Belarus, it's very far-fetched to believe that there will be a free and fair election. And of course, one of the main demands of opposition figures is that there be a new election after that's free, fair, transparent, and that enables all candidates to be able to participate, and also the freeing of all political prisoners, because in the last several weeks, we know there have been thousands detained, arrested, whether it's a focus on journalists, vloggers, whether it's a focus on opposition candidates, people having to flee the country, opposition figures fleeing the country because out of fear of their safety. So these are no ordinary times, and it's obviously quite tense, and it will be tense, but there's a moment now to talk about sort of how we got to this point, what's the latest on the ground, what people think will take place between now, because we're already in early election voting in Belarus. And I understand sort of just in pre-talk before that it looks like there's quite an interest in voting, maybe larger than it had been previously, even though there's a knowledge that it's likely that the voting will not be transparent. The vote count won't be transparent. So a lot to talk about, and we haven't even got to the external relations, including Russia and the West, and how that looks during and then after this election. So if I can, Veronica, can I turn to you? And again, thank you so much for your leadership. This wouldn't have happened without you and others, including my colleagues in Warsaw and back in DC, like John Alexander helped put it together. So I'm going to send it over to you to welcome our speakers, but also speak to this topic and get us started. Thank you, Veronica. Over to you.
Dear Jonathan, thank you so much for co-organizing this. Dear friends, dear colleagues, I'm greeting you from GMF Warsaw Office. I'm a Rethink.CEE fellow at the German Marshall Fund for the United States. And we decided to put together this event because we really wanted to attract people who have this knowledge on the ground. For this reason, we have today Alyaksey Znatkevich, who is a journalist who works for the Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. We have Alena Aharelysheva, who is one of the leading specialists on gender issues. And we have also Andrei Yeliseyeu, who is not only a head of monitoring group on iSANS, but also a research director of the center I'm also part of. And these three people will be able to share with you, I would say, the most intriguing moments of these nuances of this campaign, namely the participation of independent media and bloggers, the role of women and the gender factor, and also the role and the intrigue dealing with the Russian influence, Russia's participation in this campaign. As Jonathan stated, early voting started already yesterday. And we were discussing before you all joined that already there are some repressions against our limited number of observers. And so this, for sure, this will be quite a challenging week for all of us, but we're planning also to rejoin and to discuss after the election what is happening. So please stay tuned. And for now, let's see what is happening right now. Let's see what this last week of election, before elections, is bringing to us. I would like to start with Alexei because he can share with us some information about the situation with the independent mass media and about the threats which independent media were facing recently, coming directly from the head of the state and also from our government. Alexei, please.
Thank you. I'm sorry that there'll be some background noise. I'm in a busy newsroom, but I'll try to keep it to the minimum. This presidential election in Belarus is different from the previous ones within the last 20 years or so in several ways. But I think the most fundamental difference is this new perception of who is in the majority. In the previous elections, there was always a feeling that the majority either supports President Lukashenko or is at least indifferent enough to accept him. This gap between official electoral results and more or less independent opinion polls could be huge and was sometimes huge, up to 30 percentage points. But there was always this argument, okay, the results are falsified, but there's obviously more people who support Lukashenko than people who support the alternative candidates. This perception has changed now. It has changed not only in the capital, in the Minsk, but also in the regional cities, in the smaller towns, and we can talk later about the reasons for that. For now, I would just say that the authorities see this change and they try to counteract. They started the campaign of repressions early, and they try to scare people, and they try to cut the flow of information. So the Human Rights Center Vesna has reported more than 1,300 arbitrary detentions since the campaign started. More than 200 people got politically motivated administrative arrests, and 25 people as of now, they face criminal charges and were recognized as political prisoners. And this includes at least 2 potential presidential candidates. We can talk about 3 maybe. I'm not sure he would run, but still. The authorities target political activists, definitely, but they also target bloggers, they target journalists, they target civil society. There are 8 people with popular YouTube or Telegram channels who are now behind bars, and they are charged with inciting mass disturbances. One of those people is Igor Losik. He was our freelance consultant on social media. He is our freelance consultant on social media. He's in prison now since June 25th. It's more than 40 days, and we miss him immensely. And one of the things that very much irritates the authorities is video streaming from the streets. This brings us back to this point of majority perception. I think it was a shock for the authorities to see how many people are ready to support the alternatives and how articulate those people are in expressing their disappointment and criticism of Lukashenko and the government. So the official media claim that we, Radio Liberty, intentionally use the same people in different places to inflate the numbers of those who want to stand in lines to sign for alternative candidates. And then the Minister of Internal Affairs said that street protests are coordinated through our video streaming. Our journalists, Alexander Dinko, Ales Piletsky, Andrei Rabchik, they were detained during those live video streams. And our colleague Anton Trofimovich was detained after a video stream, and he was beaten. The police broke his nose. When he filed a complaint, they said he was resisting law enforcement officers, and they started threatening him. They said he will have further consequences if he keeps pressing his charges. But we received audio recordings that show there had been police surveillance of him before the detention. These people knew he was a journalist. These people specifically targeted him. Dozens of journalists from other media were also detained when they were covering these protests. And in addition, there were regular problems with mobile internet connection. We cannot say for sure the government was behind it, but there are reasons to believe and to expect even bigger problems will be on the election day. And there are a few reasons to expect that the official results of the election will be much different from the previous years. I think around 80% for Lukashenko will be announced. And today, as of today, the yesterday's early vote was higher than in the previous election. It was more than almost 5% of all registered voters. In the previous elections, this was more than a third of registered voters. They supposedly voted earlier, although the observers did not see the people in the polling stations that much. So now we can expect the same, even maybe more, up to 40% voting early, and it's very, very untransparent, and we can expect some fraud with that. So the question is how people will take this announcement this time when they know, where they feel they are in majority, when there's this perception, and how many of them would be ready to protest in some way. That's it.
Alexey, thank you so much for this wonderful introduction. I would like now to pass word to Andrei, and we've already got even a question about what you're going to speak, hopefully. Would you please comment on the Russia's factor in these elections? Why do you think there are so many accusations of Kremlin's hand behind their joint headquarters of 3 women of Tikhanovskaya, Tsapkala, and Kolesnikova? And could you please also shortly comment on this Wagner so-called operation? I'm speaking here about the detention of mercenaries coming from this group to Belarus, and they're still detained. Thanks.
Sure, thank you. Good morning, everyone. And let me first thank the GMF for organizing this webinar in this complicated time for Belarus. I believe that the two most important factors that will determine the future political situation in Belarus will be the level of opposition mobilization capacity and the Kremlin's position. So indeed, there are many speculations about the so-called Kremlin's hand behind the United headquarters, although there are no conclusive evidence of any direct ties between any of the alternative candidates with the Kremlin decision makers. Before I speak about those recent developments, let me very briefly say a few words about the transformation of the political regime in Belarus. So as Alexei rightly said, it's probably the first time when the Belarusians realized that the Lukashenko's opponents are in majority. As a response to this, Belarusian we can see that in the past half a year, since around December 2019, there's an evolving transformation of Belarus political regime towards a personalist military rule. And the military, I mean not only the army, but security bodies and other law enforcement agencies. So the so-called civilian component in Lukashenko's ruling coalition has never been as sidelined from decision-making process as it is now. And such political transformation poses a threat to a possible coup against the nascent democratic regime if it happens to come to power in the near future. In the absence of the independent sociology, assumptions about the Lukashenko's approval ratings can only be from indirect evidence, like for instance, people's participation in states organized events. We saw a large absenteeism of the second European Games in Minsk last summer, and this was one of the indicators that's not in the past month only, but it started much earlier. It's this erosion of reputation of state authorities in Belarus. So coming to Belarus-Russia relations, as you well know, over the last 2 decades, Lukashenko skillfully traded geopolitical alliance with Russia and military cooperation with Russia with Russia's generosity and political support. So prior to or right after the 2 previous presidential elections, Lukashenko ensured deeper integration with Russia. So this scenario is plausible again because you know that last December, our deeper integration were put on hold. But after a series of squabbles between Belarusian and Russian officials over the response to the coronavirus epidemic, the dialogue over the deeper integration suddenly intensified in June. In June, a couple of high-level online webinars with high-ranking Belarus and Russia officials took place, which discussed the deeper integration. At one of these meetings, Belarus ambassador to Russia, Vladimir Semashko, said that Minsk is ready to sit down at the negotiation table at any time convenient to Russia, most likely in September or October. So we saw that Lukashenko is signaling Moscow his readiness to proceed with deeper integration, and his in exchange for Kremlin's political support. So this scenario of coercion of the Belarusian population into a deep integration with Russia under political weakened Lukashenko remains very plausible. But it's the detention of the Wagner militants can be seen as a sort of a game changer, because most likely this action was not pre-agreed between Lukashenko and Putin, as some people think. This accident strains the bilateral relationship between the two countries, and the response of Minsk was quite weird, because as if Minsk says that those detained people were sent to destabilize situation in Belarus, why the Belarusian Foreign Ministry didn't send a diplomatic note of protest to Russia, or the border control with Russia was not strengthened. Oddly enough, Minsk sent a diplomatic note of protests when, after Russia restricted border controls a day after the detention. These observations make many think that it was rather a prop by Belarusian authorities than a real attempt of Kremlin to destabilize situation. And until Minsk presents conclusive evidence of the opposite, people will continue thinking so. And we saw that most of Belarusians didn't believe in the official version because they were not intimidated by this news, and the large rally by Svetlana Tikhanovskaya took place in Minsk despite this worrying news. And it was one of the largest rallies in the history of Belarus. Despite that, Lukashenko, despite Minsk presented hard evidence, Lukashenko continues insisting that that was an attempt to destabilize the situation. Yesterday, he made an annual address to the parliament and population, where he mentioned, where he alleged that yet another group of militants was sent to Belarus, specifically to the south of Belarus. And again, we see a quite weird response. If groups of militants are being sent to Belarus, why Belarus does not make formal diplomatic protests, strengthen border controls, and so on. We can see that anyway, if these mercenaries were sent by Russia to destabilize the situation in Belarus, or it was a probe by Belarusian authorities, these accidents will without any doubts strain the bilateral relations. And I think that's this story might be seen as some kind of a game changer, because now the Lukashenko does not look as an adequate partner for Kremlin as he was seen before. We see that high-ranking Russian officials repeatedly put in question the grounds for their detention. So this is the situation for now, and I guess that's the most the dangerous scenario is that this story about the allegedly sent groups of mercenaries can result in some further provocations or violent actions in the days before the election, or at election day, or soon after it. Let me finish.
Thank you so much, Andrei, for this comprehensive explanation of what is happening in terms of bilateral relations, but also these mercenaries in Belarus who have been detained. And at this point, I'd like to turn to Alena and to touch upon one of the most intriguing, I would say, factor in this campaign. It's the fact that 3 successful, strong women were able to unite and to lead this campaign in a very successful way. Many of them have been criticized and accused of connections with Russia or not doing things right. But I think in a country where female leadership has been challenged for so many years, and where there is no female component in terms of our official arena, so Belarusian president never shows up with his wife, his sons don't do this really, and women have always been playing such a marginal role in terms of only being executors in this system. I think this is remarkable to see that this is happening, and that Belarusian society actually is accepting this and really welcoming this change. Alena, could you please comment on this, and could you please say a few words about other female symbols of this evolution, such a evolution, and how do you think this is all happening, and what do you think? What do you see from your perspective of an expert on gender issues? I'm afraid you're unmuted. Could you please?
Yeah. Thank you, Veronica, and thank you, colleagues. Like, I am quite skeptical, but at the same time quite optimistic about the perspective of women leadership in Belarus, because yes, according to perceptions, women can be a leader in Belarusian society. Thank you, but at the same time, that was a perception. Then men feel quite effective leader than women. For example, the Olga Kovalkova case, she told a lot about her ambitions as a candidate in a president, candidate in a president elections, but her party promoted another person, Pavel Severinets, during the primaries process. Another case of Tatiana Kratkevich, she was quite successful as a candidate to previous election, but in this election, another person from her party, Dmitriev, decided to be a candidate again. Yes, and even these three women, they told a lot during the interviews, at the same time as the public events, that we are not the leaders, we're just representatives of our men, I mean Tikhanovsky, Tsepkalo, and Paparika. Despite of this, that they're not the leaders and just the representatives, this union is quite effective, I think, and there is a couple of reasons. First of all, because again, speaking about the campaigns of Tsepkalo, Paparika, and Tikhanovsky, Tikhanovsky was more oriented to local people from regions. Tsepkalo was a representative of IT sector and technology, and Paparika was kind of a member of cultural sector and finance sector at the same time. And now all of these people are united around Tikhanovskaya. Even more, the people that has some complaints about those candidates got a sympathy to those women because of their weak situation, because they now experienced oppression from the state, and again, it looks like the whole society got a sympathy to those women and solidarity to them. Another reason, because the election program are quite general. That's free election, prison or freedom for political prisoners. It looks basically that nothing can reunite people from with different perspectives. So for this general program, all of people can join because it's just too general to reunite. There is nothing to reunite people. And the third way, like looking from general gender perspective, they use, I think, quite different meanings in different time. For example, during the public event, they use all of the stereotypical expectations around women, the weakness, the woman weakness, lots of personal touchy stories, they're crying. So that's very deep, and lots of people, like some women can be identified with those women, and men, like stereotypically, want to support them. So again, lots of supporters. And another story that this Tikhanovskaya with the first, they look basically like a symbol of feminism, even though she don't identify herself as a feminist. And Kolesnikova and Tsepkalo, in the interview, not in the public events, they speak a lot about equal opportunities, about feminist values, especially Kolesnikova speak about those. Again, this might be unite together a liberal part of the population. At the same time, people who are traditional value supporter might unite them during the public events. Again, like different part of the auditory can unite around them together. Even sometimes they promote a different kind of values. And I guess the last topic, but very important one, this idea of solidarity, support, and non-violent process, and losing of hierarchy. So they told a lot that we are not leaders. You are leaders. We don't need a strong leader anymore. And this idea of self-responsibility, that's very great. And I think this topic was losing before. At least that was not promoted so much. And because of this idea of self-responsibility, so everybody have to fight and stand not for the Tikhanovskaya and other leader. Everybody has to stand for themselves. They connect together different kind of people. Their team is very huge and very effective. That is why those protests are really decentralized. So we have lots of images and campaigns, like everybody can be their own creator of the campaign. And because of the effective work, now you can see the advertisement of free elections everywhere. I mean, really, basically everywhere. I can go to the internet, and my internet is full of this free election advertisement. My post box, every stage in every city now full of those images. So they really, I guess, more effective than official propaganda, and that's very inspirational, I think.
Alena, thank you so much. You said exactly what I wanted to hear in terms of actually this campaign being quite universal, despite the fact that it's led by women, because both men and women can relate to it, people of different generations, people of different social background. So I think this is an interesting part of it. And but you also touched upon a question I would like to, I kind of got already, and I would like to integrate it into my next question to Alyaksey about the role of social media, because we saw that there's the headquarters, they were really skillful in terms of using the social media and the images and all the instruments digital media offer. Alyaksey, why do you think, to what extent traditional media such as TV are still popular in Belarus, and why do you think Lukashenko was still using this analog, let's say, campaign instead of switching to their instruments which are being used by the joint headquarters?
Well, I think the traditional media are still quite popular among the older population, and the older people do watch. And when I say older, it means not only people in their 50s, but maybe in their 40s, people like my age, for example, they would still use television in some way. But at the same time, the new media, the internet platforms and the social media have grown immensely in Belarus in the recent years. And the authorities target journalists and bloggers, I think, precisely because the official line is losing on internet platforms and in social media. We as journalists, we try to cover the news of the current campaign, but we also try to give this broader context to our audiences on different platforms, including the historical context. Not only new younger generations have come into public life recently, but there's also this phenomenon that these older people who were non-political for many years, they now follow the news. So we try to provide some materials explaining what happened in the previous campaigns, how the electoral system works, how the political system works in Belarus. So social media and messengers give a platform for communications, not only from media to the citizens, but between the citizens on a new scale. Both it's inside and outside the country. And some of the most popular bloggers, such as Nechta, who's now based in Warsaw, outside of Belarus, and I guess their location is the main reason that they're not in prison now. Because I already told that 8 of the most popular bloggers with the total audience of 500,000 people, subscribers, I'm not talking about the audiences might be higher for some of the things, but subscribers, they are now in prison. And I remember in the year 2006, we had an exit poll here in Prague, near the embassy, organized by Belarusian students. And it showed mathematically that the election was falsified at this polling station. Now there's a similar initiative uniting 19 countries all around the world at the embassies. And the scale is higher. And of course, there are initiatives inside the country for election observation, alternative vote count, They are using social media, they are using internet-based platforms, and people are able to communicate faster, and people are able to communicate on a faster scale. And I think the government is trying to get into this, but they are running behind. So I think the main competitor here is not even the government, but maybe Russians.
Thank you so much, Alexei, for this. Now I would like to move smoothly to something which is connected to what you were talking about. Andrei, I would like to ask you to comment, because I know that you work a lot with these sources on pro-Kremlin disinformation. What was the way it was portraying this campaign, and specifically the trio? And also, I would like you to answer the question on why do you think, when we're speaking about different generations, and Alexei was talking about this briefly, why do you think all the opposition is so critical of what is happening now in Belarus, and they keep criticizing the joint headquarters for the lack of political program or clear guidelines for their connections with Kremlin, which we've already discussed. So could you please share with us what you think about this?
Sure. So in the past few months, we see a surge of publications in pro-Kremlin media portraying the political developments in Belarus as an attempt of a color revolution by the West, and the trio is often presented as puppets by some Western, by either a collective West or specific Western countries like the US, Poland, Czech Republic, or sometimes as puppets of some aggressive feminist Western groupings. Like one of the recent publications alleged that in reality some feminist groups in the West sponsor the trio, and this way the West wants to destroy traditional values and families in Belarus, and to turn Belarusian men into homosexuals and so on. So when the special policemen detain people, they this way protect traditional Belarusian values, so the publication says. Sometimes publications allege that there's a conspiracy between some inner circle, and specifically between the foreign minister Vladimir Makey and the West, as if Tikhanovsky was a project of Makey, and this way, but it's went bad, and so on. Sometimes, in rare cases, propaganda media also allege that there's a conspiracy between Lukashenko personally and the West, as if it is all staged, and you know, Lukashenko will drift towards the West, and that Lukashenko allows nationalist organizations and civil society to function, sort of preparing the ground for the drift. In any case, in each of these versions, we can see the grand propaganda narrative about bad, aggressive West that's which wants to destroy values in Belarus, to worsen its economic condition, to tear Belarus apart from Russia, and so on. There are many. There are. I guess I didn't see a single publication in very prolific pro-Kremlin propaganda outlets which presented the political developments as not conspiracy and not West-driven, but natural flow of events due to domestic political, social, economic situation. Should I also mention that one of the publication alleged that during the visit to Minsk, Mike Pompeo brought coronavirus-infected tubes and passed them to Belarusian opposition and Sergei Tikhanovsky. So at times we really see ridiculous and crazy conspiracy theories which are all dominated by this big narrative about aggressive West. And of course, we see a lot of false dilemmas about political development of Belarus, between choosing between a semi-colony, looted colony of the West, a country with civil war and genocide, if it drifts toward the West, versus successful developments in the union with Russia.
Andrei, I'm sorry, we we still have some time to discuss other issues. Could you please quickly speak about this kind of theories and criticism by the older so-called opposition in Belarus? Why do you think it is happening? Why do these narratives occur?
Sure, I think it's a human nature about all these speculations and conspiracies. Some people allege that there's a hand of Kremlin, while pro-Kremlin media allege this West hand, right? So as I said, there's no conclusive evidence about some direct connection between this headquarters and the Kremlin. Although recent actions by Valery Tsepkalo are somewhat worrying, as he the other day called upon Putin, to address him to keep an eye on the situation in Belarus and sort of react to anti-Russian actions. But as I said, a part of this, I do not see some factual evidence of puppetry and some foreign influenced grants, special operations in Belarus.
Thank you so much. Alena, we've briefly spoken about the so-called older opposition in Belarus and how the way they're seeing the trio, but would you please speak a little bit about Veranika Laputska, who is also a presidential candidate, who is also a successful female leader, but she's perceived in an absolutely different way during this campaign, despite the fact that she used to be an MP for a certain period of time recently. So what do you think, what is her role and what is the perception of her by the society, and does the way she's behaving in this campaign have any impact on the perception of female leadership in the country? What do you think?
Yeah, thank you. I think now it's possible to say that she was a successful female leader because of, I guess, because of her behavior during this campaign. She absolutely ruined all of support what was given by her before, because in this campaign she used quite a strange strategy. She cancelled all of the public events and debates because she told that I'm the best, I don't need to compare with other candidates. I can compare only with Lukashenko because it's only one candidate, which I identify as a comparative candidate for me. Otherwise, she also used a lot of complaints and even insults for another candidates. That was a Babarika, and after that the Tikhanovskaya. Even she wrote a complaint to the Central Election Commission to Tikhanovskaya because she told that they do something wrong to her. So all of this stuff are absolutely against this value of solidarity, support, of so on, which is experienced in other alternative candidates. So that's what she used. It's basically Lukashenko style of election. But that was an interview from the member of her previous team, and this guy told that now she is under oppression. And for me personally, I don't know the whole situation, of course, but for me it's quite logical because what she's doing right now, she basically ruined her political career, and what her words and these promotions, that basically like anyway she's a clever woman and she can't not understand that that's her phrases and her movements, that's just she ruins all of the support what might be given to her before.
Thank you so much, Alena. It's hard not to agree with you on what you've just said. Now we'll start taking some questions. We already got in our Q&A session, and I would like to take one of them by Alexei. There was a question about, because you work, in mass media and you kind of deal on a daily basis with the news. Do you think that events in Khabarovsk and recent protests in Russia, they somehow impacted their discourse in Belarus?
I think if there's an impact, it's minimal. We had a story on some guys who came with this poster saying "Belarus, we are with you" in Khabarovsk, and there were a couple of guys who came out with the same poster like "Khabarovsk, we are with you" in Minsk. But I think that's it. That's limited to this. I mean, people are watching what's happening in Russia, and of course, it's important that there's some movement there. But I think the local events have local roots.
Thank you so much. And I would like to start summarizing our discussion today. Of course, we didn't have enough time to discuss all the topics, but please, I'm now addressing to all the participants. If you have any questions, please keep writing them, or we will be taking them. But at the moment, I would like to speak about how do you think the EU can, assist Belarusians and help them to not to become victims of violent repressions following the elections. This is the question from Jonas Alefert. Please feel free to speak, all of you. What do you think can be done by the Western community and perhaps by the US as well? So let's probably make it broader.
If I may, I believe that the more cameras will be on the Belarusian streets, then the less likelihood of violence will be. So it will be great if Western governments encourage media to come to Belarus to cover the events. Plus, if the West can provide election observation, despite the OSCE observers were not invited in their personal capacity, if foreigners stationed in Minsk could come to election stations and be present at some mass gatherings. I think that this would also make the likelihood of violence less than it would be otherwise.
Alena, perhaps you would like to speak?
Yeah, yes, I agree with my colleague that I think the most important right now is to spread information about the situation in Belarus. It really helps. And another topic is the connections with official government in Belarus right now, because we already had examples when sometimes the connections with Europeans and America is very important for official government, and that is why sometimes if another countries are very strict about the situation which is going in Belarus, it helps the regime think about to become not a democracy but more liberal in some way, and I believe now it also helps.
Thank you, Alena. Alexei, would you like to add anything? Or
I think basically my colleagues answered the question.
I have another question we just came in about, and it's connected with what you've said about the role of media. Maybe, Andrei, maybe you can comment a little bit about the role of Belsat and what is the audience of Belsat at the moment during the campaign. I think that we noticed, those who are following the situation in Belarus, that the most popular live streams were delivered by the Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, but also by Belsat. So what is the perception of it and at the moment by the Belarusian audience, and also how to expand and grow the Belarusian audience for Belsat and other probably media? And this is a question from Ray Wojcik, from director of SEPA in Warsaw.
I believe that the viewership of independent media increases substantially each time when some important social political events take place in Belarus, because only these media give a realistic picture of the events. Of course, this translated in growing views of Belsat's radio videos and so on. And of course, the role of these new media is very important. It's to a large extent thanks to the new media, Telegram channels, and social media. That's.
I'm sorry, probably you're moving the cable and there is some noise. So.
Yeah. Sorry. So it's due to the grown role of new media. People got more well informed about the events compared to the situation we saw during the past election. So this, especially Telegram channels and social media, their impact was and remains very substantial.
Thank you so much. And we got also another question related to their outcome of the elections. What do you think, or assuming, it's a question from Tim Moody, assuming the 80% victory for Lukashenko scenario, what should the West, EU, Poland do in response over the coming weeks and months? And this is again a question to you all. And also I'd like you to think about a question from my side. What do you think would be the best case scenario for Russia, and how is it possible for Belarusians to kind of to play in this difficult game, because clearly the interests of Russia and the West at the moment are quite different in terms of what should happen next to the Belarusian society and the development of Belarusian democracy.
If I may,
Yes, Andrei, please go ahead.
The West has a very little leverage over events in Belarus, so I think it would not be right to give some very far-reaching, political recommendations or something. But if to give some very specific, of course, the West should demand the release of political prisoners and try to use existing international legal mechanisms to be part of the criminal investigation into Babarika's case, because currently Minsk points to the alleged data received from Western countries and use it as some pretext, behind this criminal case. But the West does not have a say in this story yet. So I think it would be important to explore the existing opportunities, legal mechanisms, how to be part of this criminal investigation. And on the Russia's scenario, I think that's this scenario with the politically weakened Lukashenko who pushes the country into deeper integration would be preferable for the Kremlin. I think it stays on the table despite this Wagner case.
Thank you so much, Andrei. And what do you think, Alena? What is your view on that?
Yeah, I think in this question I agree with the Tikhanovskaya program that Belarusian people has the right for free elections, because again now we at least don't have free elections at all, and it is why I believe that in some day we will have enough improved political culture with different kind of candidates, which can provide, like every candidate can provide their own political program and scenario, how we can kind of be here in this geographical and political situation between East and West, because it still be like this. But now we don't have even opportunity to choose, and I'm like I don't know how, but there is, I guess, a lot of economically and diplomacy way how it's possible to help Belarusians at least to realize one time per 26 years the right to choose, at least to choose themselves. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks all for your opinion. Alyaksey, would you like to add anything to this? How do you think Belarusians can handle this dilemma, which has been happening for several decades already?
I think the most important thing for the West is to give clear message that violence, especially on a large scale, is unacceptable in this case. Because I think the Belarusian authorities still cherish the relations with the West, with the United States, with the European Union, and they don't want, after those years of liberalization, supposedly, and improvement of relations, again, to be only against the whims of the Kremlin and Russia. So they will basically value Western support, and the West should send a clear message that violence against peaceful demonstrators is unacceptable.
Alexei, I would like to ask you another question, which I wanted really to discuss with you. How do you think this whole campaign is perceived by the Belarusian political elite and nomenclatura, Lukashenko's nomenclatura? What do you think their stance on this? And also the question from our audience, do you think the news about Lukashenko allegedly having coronavirus somehow galvanized the opposition?
Well, I think the elites, meaning the ruling elites, are not blind, and they see that Lukashenko's support has eroded. But they have incentives to keep the status quo, and the risk of defecting are very high, especially for people in police and security services. And so far, I have not seen any high-profile signs that there's a split in the government elites. But I think it's difficult to rule long-term when you know that the majority is hostile to you. You need either a strong ideology or some ethnic or religious separateness from the rest of the people. And it's not the case in Belarus. So I think in this case, the position of Russia can be an important factor of how the ruling elites think and what they do. If Russia shows clear signs that they accept the removal of Lukashenko, this could influence his entourage. But I don't think it will happen. I totally agree with Andrei that the main scenario for Russia, they want to keep Lukashenko as long as possible, especially if he becomes weaker and more prone to fulfill Moscow's demand. And I think without Russia's at least tacit consent, Lukashenko's generals or Lukashenko's high bureaucrats will not show the initiative to follow, to organize some kind of removal. If there's no, if the scale of protests is limited to hundreds of thousands even, I think the elites would still have the incentive to suppress the protests and to keep the status quo.
And what about the coronavirus news, or Lukashenko having coronavirus news?
Yes, he looked an ill person during his address, but the level of medical support he receives is high, so I don't think the opposition have high hopes. But of course, when they look at him sweating and shaking and having strange voice, it gives some pleasure to some people.
And would you briefly perhaps comment on his address yesterday? What were the main messages he sent in relation to their upcoming campaign? What can be transferred to our next kind of activities?
I think it was an address of a person who knows he's losing popularity, but he still describes most of his opponents as criminals and enemies of the people. And then there may be some duped minority by these enemies, by these criminals. And his message to the government elites was, we are in one boat. If I drown, you drown with me. But of course, we will not give the country to these opponents, criminal opponents. And his message to the people was a little bit of carrot, but also plenty of stick. He was threatening with criminal chaos if new people come to power, with poverty, with maybe terrorist activities, things like that.
I will ask you the last question, as no more questions which we haven't discussed really are coming, and I know it can be painful for us to forecast this, but do you think, what is the chance that it's going to be a violent crackdown and the violent protests, if Lukashenko gets 60 or 80%, doesn't matter whether more or fewer people will come out? How possible do you think it is, and what should be the actions of democratic community internationally if this happens?
Is it a question for me?
It's for all of you. It's for all of you. Alena, would you like to start?
Yeah, I can start. I think that the variance of the violence scenario is quite high. From one part, we had a lot of the mass media broadcast right now when Lukashenko is going, like all of the Lukashenko election company right now, he just going from one military service to another military service. So that looks like it is his main electorate, and this electorate is ready to do something. And from another perspective, I work right now as an observer, during the election, and I spoke a lot with again, like local people who decided to be observers because they want to be part of this process, and they're great, but they're ready to do everything, like everything. And again, what we are experienced right now, like in every school, when the election is going, it looks like a fight between observers and between teachers who kind of trying to protect the elections. So I mean, this the social conflict, it's already here, and because of this mood of the society, I think that's unfortunately the violence scenario is quite possible because people from both sides are ready for that.
Thank you so much, Alena. And before we give the word to Alexei and Andrei, could you please also, both of you, Andrei, Alexei, integrate the last question for today? Whether there is actually the option that Lukashenko leaves his post peacefully, and what would military do in this regard? And what do you think? Would they support the result of the elections and support the peaceful population?
The short answer, he will not live peacefully. He will not live by his own will. I misunderstood the previous question, actually. The question was how the opposition was galvanized by the whole situation with the coronavirus. I thought just by the illness of Lukashenko. No, it was a very important factor, as Jonathan had mentioned. It hit the economy directly, and the economy had not been in good shape in any way to begin with. But it also limited the opportunity for many people who had worked in Russia because of the closed borders. And some of these people had been affected by the so-called social parasites decree 3 years ago, when people basically had to pay de facto tax for being unable to find a good job in Belarus. Now they are stuck in Belarus. And the response to the pandemic by the government, by Lukashenko personally, did not impress many people. He did not, not only he tried to dismiss the threat, he also was very disrespectful to people, especially to dead people. He attacked some of the victims, blaming them for their own deaths, saying some of the dead were too fat, some of them were too old to walk the streets during the pandemics. And it all played against him, I think. And authorities tried to hide the information about coronavirus, and the information landscape has changed, so they were not able to suppress it as successfully as before. Great.
Okay.
Unfortunately, the likelihood of violence is quite high, and Lukashenko missed the chance yesterday to make it lower. In his annual address, as Alexei said, he would say, "People, I was wrong in some cases, and I understand the grievances," and he could give some empty promises, at least to promise some constitutional reform and more power to people. Insults people and make them feel bad. So this only increases the chance of some violent scenario, especially taking into account Lukashenko's visits to military units and
Yeah, but what should be the reaction of the democratic then community, international community, if this happens? Because I think it's important for us not to give some also recommendations how they should react if violence happens next week. Andrei, did you hear the question?
Sorry, yes. the connection dropped for a few seconds. As I said, the West's reaction, like the more eyes, the more diplomatic presence and media presence will be in Belarus, the less likelihood of violence. I think that the West should make it very clear, and maybe make some joint statements of some international organizations and Western countries, and to draw a red line and make it absolutely clear for Belarus authorities that excessive violence will not be tolerated and have big consequences for further relations.
Thank you. And Alexei, do you think that the military could support the Belarusian population if they start to protest next week? Do you think they can change the sides, something which also has been happening in this discussion for so many years already?
Well, that's a question I don't want actually to make any predictions with, because if they change sides, it means that they had been on one side already, that they had been used for suppression of the protests. And if the military is used to suppress the protests, that would probably mean much has changed. I mean, even in the previous elections, they were using the interior forces that are technically subordinated to the Ministry of the Interior, not to the military command. And then in this case, I think much will depend also on the position of Russia.
Alena, you wanted to add something?
Yes, because it just also coming to this discussion, the woman side of Gramada political party, they create, I guess, very impressive video, I guess, a week ago. So that was a video addressed by the wives and sisters and mothers of politicians' service and military service. And this video called like, can you please stop your husbands at home, or something like this. And again, this like the whole symbol of these elections, they trying to play through the female solidarity here, and they trying to through the woman who is near those political and military representatives, they're trying to little bit pressure those people.
Thank you, Alena. This is very important. Also, I think we're running out of time. Jonathan, if you don't mind, there is just one last question.
Sure.
And then I think we have to conclude because many of our participants have already left. Everybody's very busy this week, of course. So there is another question from Ray Wojcik. What side is China on in this campaign? How does China benefit with Lukashenko still in power? And does Putin loss regarding Belarus mean China will win? Maybe Andrei, you could take this question, because I know that recently you wrote a little bit about Belarus and Chinese relations.
I didn't see any explicit statement by China, but on the Belarus-China relations, we see that Minsk is involved in increasingly not beneficial economic cooperation with China on many accounts, be it a growing trade deficit and a number of unsuccessful joint projects on tied Chinese loans, and very low developments of China-Belarus industrial park, and now the prospects for this China Silk Road initiative are not so bright due to the coronavirus outbreak and so on. So, but we can see that probably Minsk disregards this economic outlook of cooperation in favor of military and political relations with China. So I think that Minsk keeps Beijing in heads as at least some counterbalance to Russia and the West.
Thank you so much. I will just cite important information for, I think, all the participants from one of our leading sociologists, Professor Andrei Yeliseyeu, who is saying that level of insufficiency of government activity regarding COVID-19 was estimated by Belarusians as second through 58 countries in comparative international survey, second worst position through 58 countries. And this was the beginning of mobilization. Was what Professor Vardamatsky is saying, and this is getting back to the question about COVID and Lukashenko and how this all played together. So Jonathan, over to you.
Great. First of all, just thank you so much to our speakers. I think we've had a number of questions, in fact, more than we typically get in a session. I'm struck by all of your statements. One, which started off, which is that the majority internally in Belarus has changed. And I think this is a really important message to both, obviously this is important internally in Belarus, but also externally for those people to understand that perhaps that, this is a very significant change in how Belarusians, what they want, what their future is. And I think that has to play into the calculation of those people who are looking at how to engage pre-election and then post-election. And so I think it's very important that, and I think I appreciate, it's absolutely critical that the US and the EU and others speak very loudly and quickly about violence post-election, but also be very frank about the nature of this election as well. And there's a number of tools that the EU and the US have to express unhappiness, to hold accountable those for human rights violations, for what takes place during the election, if there's violence, and absolutely a need to call for the release of all political prisoners. When Secretary Pompeo was in Minsk in February, he said that the relationship with the United States moving forward, if it were to get better, is based on making certain these human rights violations don't happen, that there's forward progress on democracy. And so I think that what we've seen over the last several months is a regression in many ways, in a very dangerous way, and it could go from bad to worse. So it's absolutely important, I think, as speakers pointed out, and I am 100% certain that those that are watching, both in Washington and elsewhere, are formulating how they're going to respond. So I appreciate that feedback. So on behalf of the German Russia Fund, we want to thank you. Veronica, we will do another post-election event, virtual event as well, because I think what I'm hearing from all of you is keeping a spotlight on Belarus isn't just a pre-election issue, it's post. And I am very much interested to see which really, how the opposition that is formed, how it will take shape post this election, and the demands that are going to be laid out, especially if we all agree that this was not a free and fair, transparent election, what that might look like internally in Belarus. And I just want to thank you also, particularly Andrei, for your comments on the dynamics with Moscow and what's taking place. And I think a lot of people are watching that carefully, trying to dissect and understand what this election means for Belarus, but also, Alena, too, just this dynamic of who can be a leader in Belarus in 2020 and beyond, women, next generation. And it just goes back to this, the majority has changed. And I want to make sure all the factors that were discussed need to be, they're certainly being digested internally in Belarus, but also by partners, including those on the border, on the border of Belarus, regionally, and then also those that are looking far afield from Washington and elsewhere. So I can't thank you enough. I know you're busy. We look forward to reading all of your reports, your writing, what's taking place, and we'll hopefully be back shortly after the elections to get an assessment, but really delve into what will come next. So thank you, Veronica. Thank you too for your leadership in pulling this together from Warsaw, and also for our colleagues here in Washington, John Alexander, for pulling all the tech side of this together. We look forward to seeing all of you soon. Be safe, and we look forward to our next conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, everyone, and good luck with your, Alexey, with your journalism, Andrei, with your research, and Alena, good luck with also your research and also your observation. And please do share with us what happens during these days. And thank you very much once again, Jonathan and John, for putting this together. And thanks a lot to all the participants for being so active and so engaging. It was a great pleasure, and see you hopefully maybe in a different Belarus, I don't know, in a week, who knows.
Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.